Hey, Rochester University. My name is Brandon Cleaver. I serve as an itinerant speaker, usually on topics of apologetics and evangelism. And I want to thank Rochester University, and in particular, Evan Green, for allowing me this opportunity to come speak to you for a few minutes today. Um, so, in my brief time today, I want to talk to you about the importance of apologetics in the 21st century. And for this talk, it sort of gives the biblical grounding for apologetics. And if you aren't familiar with that term, don't worry, I'll give you a brief definition in just a minute here. So, I want to assume right off the bat that you have some familiarity with bicycles, whether you've rode them, you tried to ride them, you've seen other people ride them. Just keep those experiences in the back of your mind as I give you this illustration here. Now, C.S. Lewis, he's known for writing incredible works like the Chronicles of Narnia, Mere Christianity, so on and so forth. And he also has this obscure book of essays called Present Concerns. And in this, he has this essay called Talking About Bicycles. Now, in this essay, he gives the four stages that we sort of go through in riding a bicycle: unenchantment, enchantment, disenchantment, and reenchantment. So unenchantment is sort of where my daughter Braylon is at. She's 2 years old. She has a bicycle in our basement, and it's for her. She's not at the point where she really understands how to ride a bicycle. So for her, the bicycle is just a toy and a sea, and I do mean a sea of other toys in our basement. And then we have the stage of enchantment. And now this is where my middle child, Bryson, would be at. Now he'll be 4 in May, so he's just getting to the point where he's learning how to ride a bicycle. He's enjoying riding down the driveway or up a hill or down the street. He's really becoming enchanted by the idea of and the practice of riding a bicycle. But then for many of us, at least for me, life hit. You know, bills become more important, schoolwork piles up, you have a job, and all these things to think about. So a bicycle went way down on the level of importance for me, and it was in my garage for years and years, just collecting cobwebs. So I became disenchanted with the whole idea of riding a bicycle. And then my oldest son, Braden, you probably see this theme of B names. But Braden, he's 11 years old, so he's been riding a bicycle for a little while now. But he's not quite at the age where I feel comfortable with him riding for a mile or two away from the house. So I started riding with him. And in doing so, I became sort of re-enchanted by this idea of riding a bicycle. Now, although C.S. Lewis uses these four stages about bicycles, the bigger the bigger thing that he's trying to bring home is that these four stages apply to so many different aspects of our life. Consider love. Many of us at a young age, we were rather unenchanted by the idea of love. That could be we were interested in toys and other things like that. But then as we get older, we become enchanted by the idea of love. And perhaps we even meet someone who we think is pretty special. And then things inevitably oftentimes don't work out. And we become disenchanted with the idea of love. We think we'll never find that special someone again. And then what often happens? We find a special him or her and become re-enchanted by this idea. Now, for many people, they're stuck actually in this third stage of disenchantment. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. I don't have the time to go into it right now. But this third stage of disenchantment often parallels where people actually wander away from God. And for us as Christians, this is where apologetics comes in. Apologetics it comes from the biblical verse, First Peter 3:15, which exhorts us to always be ready to give a reasoned defense for the hope that is within us, but to do it with gentleness and kindness. In other words, whenever you have that opportunity to talk to someone on why you believe that Jesus is the hope that undergirds you, that he is the way, the truth, and the life, to be ready to tell someone why that's the case. And oftentimes people think that apologetics is just about these philosophical, abstract truths. And while there are some abstract aspects of it, it's also about the concrete realities, our lived experiences. And that's why I love this quote by Blaise Pascal. He says, make religion attractive, make good men wish it were true, and then show them that it is. worthy of reverence because it really understands human nature, attractive because it promises true good. And that, my friends, is where enchantment comes into play. You see, again, apologetics is typically perceived as this method of removing obstacles to and providing reasons for faith so people can get a clear understanding of who Christ is and what Christianity is. And so we must be able to move within a culture which is a melting pot of other cultures, particularly here in America. And at Rochester University, I'm sure you have a culture where you have people from all different backgrounds, from different countries and things like that. You have to be able to move with in and out of these different cultures and be malleable as a Christian and in explaining why you have that hope within you. So in this way, apologetics is not just about giving reasons for the Christian faith, but it's also about giving reasons within various cultural frameworks. And I think the New Testament writer and Apostle Paul actually gives us an incredible example of this in Acts chapter 17, where he visits the Areopagus in Athens. So essentially, in Acts chapter 17, he's on this speaking tour with his two companions, Timothy and Silas, in the Mediterranean area. And they're in this city called Thessalonica, and there, as Paul usually did, he would go in the local synagogues and reason from the scriptures with people. He would tell people again why he believed that they should come to place their faith and their trust in Jesus, the true Messiah. But oftentimes, this message was received with a lot of animosity from the local Jewish crowd. And he would often incur a lot of persecution. And this was one case. So as he fled this Jewish persecution, the people of Thessalonica put him on a boat and sent him to Athens. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word Athens? It's this majestic place, this place where the famous philosophers from antiquity, like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, they penned these incredible works. Now, this would be known as the classical period. So when Paul arrived, it was a little past the classical period, but it was still by far the most advanced city that he would ever travel to. It was a place where people were highly educated. There was incredible artistry. Philosophy was everywhere, and it was replete with sculptures. But it was also replete with these sculptures of gods and goddesses. In fact, the historian Pliny the Younger said that when you arrived in Athens, there was this 40-foot statue of the Roman goddess, was the goddess of wisdom and warfare, Minerva, right when you came in. And there was, some historians describe it as just as if you would come out of Rochester University and go on the street, you would see stop signs and stop lights and all these other traffic objects. Their culture had statues of gods and goddesses everywhere, everywhere. So for them, that was their idols. But for us, and in the 21st century, our idols are a little different. You see, they may not come in the form of statues, but our idols are money, comfort, sex, phones, our social status, how many likes and dislikes we get on Facebook, or how many retweets we get on Twitter. So just as you see, it says in verse 16 that when Paul arrived in Athens, that his heart, that he was actually incredibly upset by what he saw, because instead of worshiping the true God, they adored lifeless idols. And this would serve as the catalyst for why he would come to proclaim Christ to them. So just as his heart was stirred, let me ask you, are our hearts stirred by the idols of our times, those things that I mentioned? You see, Paul knew the price of worshiping such things: futility, a twisted morality and ethics, and utter ultimate hopelessness. And just as I ask, are our hearts stirred by these idols? Perhaps I should back up and ask, are our own hearts consumed by some of these idols? But as we go on in verse 17 and 18, Paul starts to address some of the people in Athens, in the synagogue and in the marketplace. And he specifically identifies these two groups, the Stoic and Epicureans. Now, the Epicureans was this upper class of individuals. They believed in the Greek gods, but these Greek gods were aloof, meaning that they didn't have daily dealings with human beings. And they believed that one should live your life according to pleasure. And then you have the Stoics, who existed about 300 years before Christ. And then they believed that reason actually poured forth from the universe, and that reason should serve as the compass for life. But in Christianity, faith and reason are not mutually exclusive. You see, they have a symbiotic relationship. Faith in Jesus Christ serves as the foundation for Christianity, and reason is the roadmap for our mind. But you see, the Stoics and Epicureans and others started to inquire about this new teaching that Paul had and was talking to them about. They wanted to know more. So they brought Paul from the marketplace and from the synagogue to this incredible place called the Areopagus. Now, the Areopagus, Aero and Pagos, is actually two Greek words that actually mean the hill of Ares. And you might recognize Ares as the god of war. So you see this continued theme of idolatry in Athens. Now, the Areopagus was comprised of the city council in Athens, and they dealt with the ethical, cultural, and religious matters. So when people would come from out of town, like Paul, they would be the ones to address them. And it was actually interesting that this was the council that actually tried and ultimately killed Socrates for his teachings. Now, to be fair, we have no reason to think that this was going to be the case with Paul, but still, this is an important historical note. So this, my friends, is where Paul gives his famous speech. And he starts off, and you see that what he does in this, remember to think about this. The first thing that he does is he builds a bridge in his conversation. In verse 22, Paul says, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are religious." So Paul is sort of this he projects this positive way to say that, hey, I see that you are devout, that you, just like me, we're both religious, we're both devout in our beliefs. And so to build a bridge, as my friend and co-founder of the Jude 3 project, Lisa Fields, says, in order to build a bridge, you have to be connected on both sides. And that's what Paul is doing here. He's looking for a way to build a bridge to connect with these folks of a different belief system. And that's so key for us as we engage in discussion and in apologetics with others. Now we start to see the other side of this bridge in verse 23. He says, "For as I passed along these objects and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" Now, historically, this unknown God is very interesting, because according to Athenian tradition, there was this 500-year plague where a third of the population actually died. And so they would actually sacrifice to all of these gods and goddesses in hopes that these sacrifices would please them and the plague would stop, but it didn't. So there was this Greek philosopher, Epimenides, and what he did, he said, let's build an altar to an unknown God and sacrifice to that God, and perhaps we'll end up pleasing him. And Paul would actually use this unknown God, the statue to an unknown God. He would use this to reveal to them the true God. So in verse 28, Paul explicitly quotes the same pagan philosopher, Epimenides, and another, Aratus. He says, "For in him we live and move and have our being, for we too are his offspring." Now, these lines were meant to describe the Greek god Zeus, but Paul used it, he applied it to the one true God. You see, some may say, in his referencing of a pagan philosopher, some may see this as strange, but we must remember that all truth is ultimately God's truth. And this was also a way, again, to bridge the chasm of understanding. This showed that he knew their beliefs, and this was so key. This is key for us. Do we know some of the beliefs of our neighbor, even those of a different belief system? So that when we engage in conversations with them, that we're not starting sort of from this sort of a zero-sum place. And it also shows that we love and care about them to know a little bit about what they believe. But as Paul goes on, he continues his descriptions, ending with the fact that God will judge the world through one man, whom he provided proof by raising him from the dead. And of course, he's referring to Jesus. Now, this idea of a physical resurrection was scandalous, utterly scandalous to the ears of the Greeks. They lacked any type of belief in a physical resurrection. But through his discourse with them, ultimately some believed. In fact, Scripture actually records the names of a man and a woman who believed. And this was so important because during that time, if you read this, you would be able to perhaps go to Athens and talk to those who were there to hear, is this true? Did these people really come to believe? What were some of the other things perhaps Paul talked about that wasn't recorded here? So this, my friends, again, was Paul's apologetic, a brief overview of Paul's apologetic tour de force. Now, I understand that we may not have a parallel example in our world. Perhaps you're not going to be at a place where you're standing in front of a bunch of men and women at a place like the Areopagus and giving the reasons for the hope that you have in Jesus. But the important thing for us to remember is that Paul sought to enchant his crowd by telling them the story that undergirds the hope that he has. Are you able to tell someone the story, a story for the hope that you have? Are you able to do it with kindness, with compassion, with clarity, and with a centrality on Christ? And along the way, he dealt with some of their preconceived notions about things of gods and goddesses and so on and so forth. Now, there's this atheist. His name is Luke Ferry. He says, I find the Christian proposition infinitely more tempting, except for the fact that I do not believe it. But if it were to be true, I would certainly be a taker. Isn't that interesting? You see, sometimes it takes someone who is willing to be a vessel for God to use, to show and to ultimately explain that their desires, the type of desires that Luke Ferry just talked about, that his desire and that others isn't misplaced, but that their desire is actually something that's true. So let me close on this. Where is your Athens? Where is the place that perhaps God is calling you to? Are you prepared to give a reason for the hope that is within you? Are you prepared to move within a culture maybe that looks a little differently than you, to talk to people that maybe believe things that are different than what you believe in? This is what we're called to as Christians, to bring the good news to others. And this is what Paul did in Athens, in a culture, again, that was replete with explicit idolatry. Remember the words of Blaise Pascal. Make religion attractive. Make good men wish it were true, and then show them that it is. Worthy of reverence because it really understands human nature, attractive because it promises true good. He's not saying make religion attractive just for entertainment reasons, just to get someone sort of hyped up and enchanted about it, just for no avail. He's saying make them desire it. Make them desire for this to be true. Make them see that good men and women, they want this to be true. Again, as Luke Ferry said, and then show them with reason and with kindness and with clarity. Show them that it is true. So where's your Athens? Perhaps it's at Rochester University. Perhaps it's in your family. Perhaps it's the next time you, ride the bus or wherever you may be at. But consider, where's your Athens, my friends? Thank you.